Hi, this is Britta LaFont from BrittaLaFont.com, and today I'm talking to you about Elizabeth George's Putting on a Gentle and Quiet Spirit, Lesson 21, and it's called Joining the Order of the Towel. And of course, this is a reference to the time that Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, and he told Peter that if he was going to continue and lead the flock, that he would need to lead by serving. And so Elizabeth George credits author Jill Briscoe with coining this phrase, but she's saying that's basically what we've all signed up for, is to join the Order of the Towel. So I'm going to go ahead and read today's passage. It comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by constraint, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you. Be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Well, the thing that jumped out at me from this lesson was a question that she asked on page 122. She asked about the three groups of people. And right away, I thought, well, I see two groups of people, but I didn't see the third one, which was sort of snuck in at the end. So she said this passage talks about leaders, talks about good leaders, good followers, and then gives advice that we should all submit to one another. All of us are under the same sort of marching orders, if you will. So the thing that I loved about that was I had totally missed the all of us part. Maybe it was the submit yourselves to one another that I skipped over quickly. But what she's pointing out is that Peter is saying our roles may be different in how we relate to one another, so that, you know, leaders have certain responsibilities and those who follow have other responsibilities. But yet, as Christians, we have the same responsibility to the Lord, and that we would submit ourselves to one another for the good of the body. And I love that. I think that's really important. And that's important within a family or any other situation where you might find yourself. Even with non-Christians, I think that having a strong love for the Lord and a humble heart definitely speaks well of Him to non-Christians. And so that submit yourselves to one another, having a submissive way with others can really win people over for Jesus. Even though it definitely goes against our nature, it's really not the first our first knee-jerk reaction probably. Okay, so firstly, of these questions, or I guess not firstly, but secondly, the other question on page 122 that really struck me was she asked, how can you do a better job of the two admonitions? One is being submissive to one another, and the other is being clothed in humility. And of course, these go hand in hand. You can't be submissive to anyone else if you're not clothed in humility. And of course, being submissive to others requires humility. So they go hand in hand. And I have been looking at this a lot lately. Actually just finished the first draft of an ebook that I've put together. And in it, I talk a great deal about the need for us to be humble, because being humble is what makes us like Jesus. And it also enables us to relate to other people in a loving way, and to relate to God in the way that we were meant to, because He is our leader. And if we can't be humble and submit to Him, our pride will be our undoing, basically. So, so the things that came to my mind were, of course, praying and being in the Word, because our world is so different from the world that or I guess the way of thinking and the way of living that we see in the Bible. Our world leads us in a different direction. So if we don't shore ourselves up and plant the right things in our hearts, it's easy for us to get distracted by what seems to be the truth, but is really in the world and is not the truth. So the other thing that I have found is very important is confession. Confessing you're wrong is the thing that humbles you. Now, of course, that's confessing with a right heart. That's not confessing through clenched teeth. But the confession, when you've done wrong, being able to own it and not own it with a, yeah, but there's some reason for it, not giving any excuses. Because you can always find excuses for your behavior. If you have done something wrong, you need to admit it, you need to name it, and you need to ask for forgiveness. These things are the things that humble us. If you have a relationship that, man, always seems to be the person that baits you, the person that can get you provoked, and you think to yourself, how can I manage dealing with this person? It's difficult because they're a difficult person. Well, I think the first thing is to own your part of it. And as hard as that may be, how often do we think, well, they started it, they're the problem? Well, God calls us to be constant in our faith, constant in our behavior, and ultimately we are accountable to Him regardless of who is in our lives or what situation we're put in. In order to submit, or to learn to submit and to learn to be humble, we have to be able to to see our sin and admit it, and admit it to other people without making excuses. Because ultimately, that is the thing that humbles you. And when you humble yourself, God will lift you up. Now, if you do it for the wrong reasons, if you aren't really humble in your heart, but you're trying to get reconciliation in a relationship, so you're saying what the person wants to hear, well, that doesn't do any good. If you are saying, I'm sorry, but you're not really saying what you're sorry for, and you're not asking for forgiveness, then I think that that's a waste of breath. To be honest with you, I hear it all the time from people, and you hear people making up and they say, oh, I'm sorry for this, I'm sorry for that. And that is one of my pet peeves. I mean, when you say I'm sorry, you're telling me about your feelings. And I'm glad you're sorry. You should be sorry if you're wrong. But that's not the important part. The important part is that you own what you did. You say, I lost my temper. I should never speak to you that way. Can you please forgive me? Not, I lost my temper because you really got on my nerves and you shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. It doesn't sound like you're sorry when you say that, when you come up with excuses. And ultimately, when you make excuses for your bad behavior based on someone else's behavior, your pride is getting in the way and you are not humbling yourself. I don't think any growth can come from that kind of attitude. And I really firmly believe that where I see growth, spiritual growth, and being able to put aside behaviors that aren't godly, where I see that in my life is where I have been able to admit without excuse my wrong. So I cannot emphasize enough that that is what's important. And when you ask someone to forgive you, you're making yourself vulnerable. Sometimes it's very hard to say those words. You think maybe they won't forgive me, or maybe you think I don't want their forgiveness. That's the wrong attitude of the heart. So anyway, that's a big part, I think, of growing in humility is confessing. There's much more to be said about confessing, but I don't have time today. So the last thing I want to say is that she talks about leaders are to keep on leading. She says this on page 123. She says, she gives this quote from this missionary, and he says, sometimes I feel that my cross is heavy beyond endurance. My heart seems worn out and bruised beyond repair, and in my deep loneliness, I often wish to be gone. But God knows best, and I want to do every ounce of work He wants me to do. I think that's the key, whether it is whatever trial you're facing, is understanding that God has placed you in this very position, in this very opportunity. It is for your growth, for His glory, for His kingdom, for another's benefit. And when we shirk that, when we get our feathers ruffled, when we go kicking and screaming, we miss the opportunity. God's kingdom is not going to fail, not based on our disobedience, but we will miss out if we don't go willingly and do every ounce of work that God has for us. So I think that leading with humility, following with humility, and being submissive to one another um, is just part of the human, a part of the process of growing. And part of our human condition is that we rebel against that. But that is the opposite of what we want to be. We want to be more like Christ, and he was humble, and he was a good leader, and he knew how to follow because he laid down his own will in order to obey the Lord. So that's quite a bit of inspiration. But I think I'd like you to just maybe think about this week, and if you could, in the comments, I would love to hear if you could try out the idea of confessing to the other person. Of course, after once you've reconciled with another person, you also need to confess to the Lord because you need to own what you've done with him too. And I don't think it's good to beat yourself up. I don't think it's good to get stuck on your sin. But I think it's good to deal with it, move through it, move past it, and realize that God uses it for his glory in your life. And so that's another opportunity not to be missed. Well, I hope you have a great week, great weekend, and I hope to hear from you in the comments. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.